welcome to Talking F1. We're a podcast from GP Grandstand that is more or less what that title says. We talk about F1. That means Formula 1, Formula 2, Formula 3 and the W Series. I'm your host, Jim Kimberley, and I am joined as ever by Drive Tribe's Supreme Chancellor of the F1, F2 and F3 tribes, Thiemo Albers-Daly. How are you, Thiemo?
I'm pretty good, thanks, Jim. How about yourself?
Yes, not so bad, thank you. And we're trying a slightly different format this week and are focusing on one series at a time. So be sure to check out the rest of the GP Grandstand YouTube channel to hear us talking F1 about W Series and Formula 2. But for now, Formula 1 raced twice at Silverstone for the British Grand Prix with the trial of sprint, but the shortest race of the weekend was Max Verstappen's after a first lap crash, and we're going to be talking F1 about that, plus what it will mean for the rest of the championship. Was sprint qualifying a success? Ferrari's stride forwards and Sergio Perez's scruffy weekend. But Thiemo, really only one place to start, and that is the major talking point. Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen going great guns on lap one of the Grand Prix, and Hamilton clipping the inside of Verstappen, sending Verstappen into a terrifying crash into the wall. Huge ramifications for the championship. A lot of discourse on the internet about Hamilton being at fault. Should the stewards have been more lenient? Should the stewards have been harsher? What's your take on the entire Verstappen versus Hamilton crash situation?
I mean, I'm going to start by saying that no matter what I say, it's going to annoy someone on the internet, so I'm just going to go full guns blazing regardless and crucify me accordingly. But I think that given that it was on lap one of the Grand Prix, generally, and I mean, it's not the rule for everything that happens on the first lap of a race, but you are more inclined to think of these kind of accidents as a racing incident because lap one is when a lot of the action of any Grand Prix happens. And was it a bit of an ambitious move to do it there? Sure, but at the same time, I think these are two drivers where they're both at the top of their game, or at least very close to. You kind of worry if Hamilton's not at the top of his game because that kind of worries you for the next 2 years. But they're very advanced in their careers and their driving ability, and I think that neither one of them was going to back off really there. And I think, as Coulthard said in the Channel 4 commentary, it was always going to happen at some point. It always does when it's a titanic battle between two drivers like this for a championship. So I think you can blame either one, but I think it was just a racing incident at the end of the day. And I wonder if people would agree with that if it wasn't those two drivers and if it had been, say, Alonso and Vettel or Ocon and Tsunoda or someone, any other two drivers on the grid pretty much. Because again, it would be maybe, it's an ambitious overtake, you've got to try something, and then you've got the whole Senna quote, if you don't go for a gap, you're no longer a racing driver. And I mean, it was a good thing that Max was okay. I mean, that just proves the safety aspect of F1 cars these days, that you don't have to worry about that too much. I mean, it was a serious crash, but I don't know if it was just all the angles I saw or watching live, but it didn't look awful on initially when we saw it, for me at least. So I was a bit surprised that everyone was making such a big deal out of it. It was only when I saw the car afterwards that it was like, okay, it's quite a big impact. But the important thing, he's fine. And I think, I mean, understandably, Christian Horner was quite unhappy about it for some reason. But I feel like if it had been Max if it'd been role reversal and he'd been the one to take Hamilton out, I wonder if he would have been that annoyed at his own driver, or would he have been saying the complete opposite of what he was saying all weekend long. The stewards, I mean, historically here, we've not been too happy with them generally across all forms of motorsports in terms of what they do, but so I'll just say, 10 seconds. It was never going to guarantee Hamilton the win, and I think there were a couple of the factors that could have stopped him from getting the win. So 10 seconds, it could have been. You could have given him more, but I don't think it would have made an awful lot of difference. And it turns out later on that Hamilton could have retired anyway due to the damage that he sustained during that, and the fact that he could have pitted before the red flag and he could have got the damage fixed, but he didn't. So then obviously they had to fix his car with what looked like duct tape. So I feel like if anyone was going to make a recovery drive to go back and win the race, it would have been Lewis. And if it driver, we wouldn't be talking about it. So I feel like it's just there's been a lot of steam blown that way, and I wonder how much of it is necessary.
Yeah, it's a strange one in terms of the penalty situation, and crucifying is the right word for how people have gone on the internet afterwards. And I have no qualms with anybody's opinion. Everybody's entitled to them, and I would generally think the massive fanboy Hamilton fans and the massive fanboy Verstappen fans would behave exactly the opposite as they are now if the shoe was on the other foot. And that's just bias, and that's fine. And I try to be fairly neutral on these things with complete open honesty. I'm British, and I championed Hamilton when he first came in. At this point, when he's going for 8 championships, I would love a change, be that Verstappen or anybody else. So, with that said, I do think Hamilton was at fault for the incident. I don't think it was malicious. I think it was messy. And I don't think
he would have ever done anything like that intentionally. And we know that for him as a person and as a driver. So
yeah, Red Bull may disagree after taking Albon out twice, but generally speaking, those things have been drifting out wide, holding the line. This is probably the worst of those incidents. And because of the championship ramifications, I think it's under the spotlight a lot more than it might otherwise be. Like we saw with Brazil, with Albon, like we saw last year in Austria, wasn't it, with Albon as well, that those things were affecting Albon's championship hunt because he was never in it. So yeah, I don't think Max or Lewis are dirty drivers. I think Lewis has a bit more experience to know when to back out of things, and I was surprised he didn't particularly back out. He did brake earlier, but it was too late.
I think maybe that'll be partly down to the fact that Red Bull have had such a dominance recently, and it being Silverstone as well, he had to try to be a little bit more aggressive, and maybe that was a contributing factor there. But again, Max is not known for being someone who backs off either. So I think it was just a combination of those things in the wrong corner.
That's my thinking with this, that Hamilton has gone manic on Silverstone several times, and it's because it's Silverstone, and I do think he drives differently there, and that's potentially to his detriment. But like Mansell used to say, this, the fans are worth half a second a lap, and we've seen Hamilton. Yeah, I do genuinely think he drives different at Silverstone, and also with the knowledge that the Red Bull was a stronger car, remains to be a stronger car, despite any upgrades that Mercedes may have brought to Silverstone this weekend. Hamilton will be aware, in particular after sprint, and we want to talk about sprint, that from that, Verstappen had the better car, better race car. Hamilton found something, like he does, that extra half a second to grab the initial pole position, but then not pole position for the race. And those battles, because that was the 3rd time he was side by side with Verstappen in that one lap, which was great to watch. But Hamilton should have backed out. Max is used to drivers backing off from him because he has a reputation which does precede him, and that's not necessarily a negative thing. That's just the way that Max is driven, and I think his earlier years of driving may have had that reputation that he doesn't back off, and therefore drivers give him more leeway than they may otherwise have. Max has definitely improved a lot from the very high level of a driver when he first joined motorsport. But one thing that I don't think he still has mastered, and that's not to be detrimental towards Max, is his patience. And we saw that in Turkey last year when he tried to overtake Perez, that could have been a race win had he played his cards right. And you say that famous quote that if you don't go for a gap, then you're not a racing driver, the Senna quote. So yeah, you want to go for a gap when you want to overtake, like Verstappen did.
I think as well, I saw a lot of comments on various different platforms that, especially from those who have no skin in the game as such, they're just there for the championship. They're not there to see, then they don't prefer whichever one of the drivers wins. They just want a good championship. And a lot of them, oh yeah, but just to counter your point a little bit, there's a lot of them saying that after they slept on it, racing incident. So it's just interesting to see from a neutral that a few more people were saying that as well. But
This is the thing with the racing incident element, though. If it's a racing incident, you don't penalise Hamilton. But the other side of that is, if you don't penalise Hamilton, Verstappen loses any chance of scoring points, and through no fault, well, from a very minor, in my opinion, fault of his own. He wasn't to blame for the crash. Hamilton didn't get anywhere near the apex of the corner, and like I say, it wasn't malicious. But this is a problem with, which is particularly unique, I believe, to motorsport, that there is no way to benefit Verstappen now he's out of the race. So Hamilton, of course, will benefit. His main championship rival is no longer in there, but it doesn't have to be Verstappen that we're talking about here. Hamilton could have done that to Leclerc, who isn't going to win the championship this year. And it doesn't help Leclerc if Hamilton gets a 10-second penalty or a stop-go penalty or a drive-through penalty. And there's
I think it was what Red Bull were alluding to after the race, they're trying to get a harsher penalty for it, but I don't think that's going to come to anything, to be perfectly honest. And
no, it's not going to come to anything.
Mentioning the Max thing as well, they're both aggressive drivers, especially with each other. And I think that as much as Hamilton could have backed out of that a bit earlier on, Max could have also done the same thing and been a little bit more patient. And because again, it was lap one of the race, you've got 52 laps to go. You could have got him in the pit stops and just made it a complete strategy race like France or I forget the other one now that I'm thinking of, but like that, we can edit that out later.
The thing with just a counterpoint to it is, I do think it was Max's corner. Hamilton was alongside on the inside, then backed out, so he wasn't necessarily alongside. But this is where it comes down to putting the blame. Stewards went for the blame on Hamilton. I can't blame them. Then it comes down to, if you're going to blame Hamilton, which again I agree with, how much do you blame Hamilton? But no matter the penalty that you put on Hamilton, it's not going to rescue Verstappen's race, who then flies off to hospital.
I was going to say, if you decided to give Lewis a race ban and we go for the extreme thing, there's no guarantee that Max then has a good race in Hungary. He could still crash out of his own accord there, and everything's exactly where it was.
The race ban and helmet being helmet going fully extreme as he does is ridiculous. The thing that does annoy me is people saying Lewis tried to kill Max. No, he didn't. Like, that's people who might think that, maybe are newer viewers.
Never try calm with reading those.
No, this is the thing though. It's like no one in F1 is trying to kill anybody. There might be things where somebody like in the heat of the moment could kill, and that's when you see a certain Russian driver in Formula 2 pushing a certain Japanese driver who's now in Formula 1. Both drivers are now in Formula 1 to the wall, and things like that, which are terrifying. Like Max squeezed Hamilton going down the national straight, but it wasn't to the extent that he was going to push him in the wall. That's that fair driving element. No. Hamilton didn't turn left into Verstappen to push him into the barriers. So these claims that people say he's trying to kill him are just utterly ridiculous, and to me show lack of knowledge about the sport. Hamilton could have been a kinder or more patient, so could Max. Max did have the line, in my opinion, though. But yeah, it's going to have huge ramifications of the championship. And from the neutral perspective, regardless of blame, regardless of who loses, or Verstappen clearly loses, but regardless of who loses, or should Hamilton get a penalty or a black flag or whatever, and by the way, the black flag banning for a race, what a horrible precedent that would set for further lap one racing. If you want to see racing on Formula 1, if you want to tune in for the only lap you must tune in for, the opening lap.
We're going to get onto it in a bit, but I was already quite annoyed with the whole George Russell penalty in the sprint. So, I mean, if that was the case, then how pissed off would everyone be if that had been the case in the
you want leniency in lap one. This is why Hamilton would get a penalty even if you thought it was a 50-50, is because he has impacted Verstappen in the race, and there's no way to then give Verstappen time. You have to take time away from somebody else, and that person should be the aggressor or the accused in this case. But yeah, the idea of banning Hamilton for a race is absolutely obscene. But for the rest of the championship,
it's great because you've got Red Bull who are on an absolute charge, and now their championship lead in both the drivers and constructors is virtually wiped out.
Yeah, so it's a big reset now.
You can see why Red Bull are so annoyed, where you wonder how much that would be if they were a little bit further, if they were a little bit safer in the championship, maybe, or various other factors.
Even I think Red Bull have won championships and they know how those things can swing. And we saw Ferrari doing so well, 2018 in particular, and then how that swings around. So if Mercedes comes strong in the latter half of the year, which I will argue, from Red Bull's perspective, it's usually them who do better in the latter half of the year. There's just no way to know. You could have another race where Max has a Pirelli blow up on him, or his Honda engine gives up, or whatever, and he's out of the championship runnings. These are the fine margins to deal with, and Max has
Lando
lost
52.
And you could argue that Max has lost 50 points in the championship with this incident and with Baku, which is huge. The turnaround is massive.
The fact that he's still so close in the championship after that is still what makes it quite tantalizingly appealing for everyone else.
For everybody else, yes, not so much for Red Bull fans, but it does show just how far ahead, how far ahead Max is and should be in the championship. And Jacob has mentioned that he thinks Max is the favourite for the championship, and there's no way to disagree with it at this point. Spent a lot longer on the Hamilton Verstappen thing, not unsurprisingly, but than I intended. But let's have a brief talk about the other stories from the race, which was Ferrari. Leclerc looked like he could have won the race at some point, and Perez across the entire weekend is now always employed as number 2 driver, but very much number 2 driver when they bring him in to lose him scoring a point, but prevent Hamilton from scoring a point. So
Perez's whole strategy all weekend just confused me a lot. It was because they stuck him. Granted, he had the off in the sprint, which he was very lucky to catch before it got into the wall there.
Looked terrifying from the first angle, didn't it? Just went.
Oh yeah, it's kind of, especially because you couldn't see where he'd gone. It was just and he's gone. But then being on the hard tyre and being the tyre whisperer that we know he is, we thought, well, okay, it's going to be quite a funny race for Perez, considering that the stewards and the FIA are trying to make pit stops more interesting, and Perez just decides, no, I just won't stop at all because I can make these tyres last the entire race. And then, despite everything that happened, he still came in a lot earlier than I thought he would, to then go on mediums, which I wasn't 100% convinced they would last to the end. So it seemed a bit curious. But then, after making so much progress up, they then brought him in again to go on mediums. And it just it confused me because, okay, they took the fastest lap away from Hamilton. So that means he gets 1 point less, but Perez doesn't get that point. He didn't get any points. And you think, okay, Perez isn't going to be able to do any damage really in the Drivers' Championship, but surely for the Constructors, you want to get as many points as you can, which he was on the bubble of the top 10 before they brought him in the final time. And you think, how buggered were those tyres really that Checo couldn't make them last to the end and maybe get 1 or 2 more places, especially with Yuki, I think, being the next one that he maybe had to overtake. And it's quite amusing in a lot of ways that Yuki was the highest Red Bull driver of the weekend.
Yeah, not something amusing if you are a Christian Horner. But no, I understand it from the perspective of why they bring him in. And I think, to me, it actually shows how committed Red Bull are to the Drivers' Championship, because, like you say, if they hadn't and he scored that extra point, from the championship perspective, they would have been the same amount of points behind. But by him nabbing the fastest lap point, and it's great that they know they can just do that. It's like, we're going to steal your fastest lap point. If that was,
it was very petty, but
it wasn't petty. I don't think it was petty. I think it was clever, because the championship can go down to a point. Hamilton knows that very well from 2007, right? That if that's the tight margins we're going to go with, the points were very different back then. But if that's tight margins you're going to go with, that point taken away from Hamilton in Verstappen's favour, not in Red Bull's favour, who end up around the same, it could be hugely impactful. So it's just interesting to see Red Bull throwing their full weight behind Verstappen and Bottas team orders. Everybody knows at this point it's a 2-horse race. And from a neutral perspective, I cannot wait to see how it goes. In particular, when you go over these first third of the season, when everyone's like, oh, Bottas and Perez, they're kind of in the fight. They're not. They never were. They're not going to be. Now we can just go for this Senna Prost.
Are you saying my prediction for Perez 2021 champion wrong?
It always was, Thiemo. I just never really wanted to tell you to your face so much. But yeah, Perez isn't going to the championship. He's had 2 poor races. I don't think he ever was personally going to win the championship, but I still think he could win a race on merit when you don't have to have his teammate crashing out.
I'll settle for him winning the Mexican Grand Prix. So.
That would be great to see. A brief touch on Ferrari as well, who the Ferrari-McLaren battle is terrific. It's not really been shown at the same level of Mercedes versus Red Bull, but Leclerc seemed to have the pace to win the race. No, maybe not if Verstappen and Hamilton were racing, but he was there.
It was such a double-edged sword for Ferrari and Leclerc this weekend. Because I mean, this time last week, if you'd offered them second place at Silverstone, they'd have grabbed it with both hands and not even questioned it. But then after the race, you think, oh, you were so close, you poor man.
He did everything right, didn't he? That was the thing. He was there to pick up everything.
It was just the car. He's driving the absolute wheels off it a bit. Not quite as much as George is driving the wheels for Williams, but not far off either. And it was just kind of, he deserved that win as much as Lewis did, if not more, considering how Lewis can catch him as soon as we might have thought he would for a lot of the race.
Yeah, the first half of the pit stops, it looked like
Leclerc had to work for it.
Yeah, Lewis had to work for it. And whether or not you agree that Lewis should have got a win or not, Leclerc certainly deserved.
That's something we can all agree on. Driver of the day and deserved the second place for himself. And Carlos Sainz as well, considering the sprint result for him, he managed to climb up nicely and get, what was it, 6th in the end. So not too bad.
6th place, yeah. And that's a sandwich that you have with McLaren's were in between the Ferraris this time, and that constructors battle raging on.
Word on McLaren though, I'm hoping this is what we see from them moving forward, because Ricciardo race of the year for him so far, and I'm really hoping that he can stay up there. I mean, he was saying at some point over the weekend, "Oh, I've not been in the top 5 yet," which is a bit sad. So it'd be nice if I could do that, and then goes and bloody does it. So hopefully that is a sign of Honey Badger coming back.
Lando still has him in his pocket at the moment, but that's just more showing how Lando is doing. But yeah, it's good to see. But yeah, let's just finish on the sprint, and I'm sure we could go really long on this. And I think what we probably will do is have a podcast.
Probably talk for longer about it than the actual sprint itself is.
Yeah, well, we've had the podcast before the episode, which is a unique episode straight into discussing the driver academies. So I think we might, and Mazepin as well, we had one. I think we'll have to do something like this for sprint because, yeah, let's just go briefly over it.
Jacob doesn't want to miss out on that one. We've got to bring him for that.
Yeah, and so spoilers, everybody. None of the three of us, Jacob, Thiemo, or I, particularly great fans. And I'm not against Formula One doing trials, and I'm glad it was a trial, because if this was what they did, I can't remember what year it was now, 2018, 2019, or we're doing a different qualifying in Australia.
2016, I think.
Is that long ago?
I thought after that, okay, they're not going to try anything stupid, or if they do, it can't be any worse than that. And I wish I hadn't thought that, because...
Well, I don't think it's stupid though, Thiemo. That's the thing. It's not stupid to try something.
Not stupid to try something. Just stupid in what they chose, maybe. Yeah,
but again, this is where I'm maybe being too generous to F1 here. That it's not the fact that this idea of a sprint race is bad. It's the idea that it's just then dishing up the qualifying. It's if you got the qualifying was great, and I just made me realize how much I enjoy the Q1, Q2, Q3 format. But do it on a Saturday. The Saturday was worse for me, in my opinion. I had to go and watch it on Friday night. Fine, I do actually quite enjoy having more races or more things to watch for Formula One that are must-sees, and terrific to see the fans turn out for what was a competitive session on a Friday. I've never seen Silverstone so busy.
My favourite part of that qualifying session was because you would never get anywhere else in the world so many fans cheering for someone to get P7.
Well, it was just amazing. I think that would be. You say that, but if there's an Italian in a Ferrari or Italian, something Italian in Ferrari,
but anytime soon, I don't see it happening.
But irrespective of the Russell element, which was terrific to see, that it was having people turn up on a Friday, having people turn up on a Saturday, having people turn up on a Sunday. And for me, I had to watch them on a Friday, and I generally don't want to watch every practice session. There's a lot to watch in general with qualifying for W Series, qualifying for F2 or F3. That practice is the first thing out the window for me. So I had to watch something on Friday, and just made the weekend extend for me, which is great. But I prefer to watch a sprint race, but not the way we've got it currently on the Friday.
I think that's what annoys me the most about the format that they chose for it. Because again, I'm on board with them if they want to try new things, but they've got a perfectly good format that they use for F2 and F3. Use the qualifying, have that set the Grand Prix for the Sunday, reverse the top 10 for this sprint, whatever you want to do on a Saturday. That would make it more interesting, because ultimately, I think one of the things that annoyed all three of us is the fact that the top 3 at the end of the sprint was exactly what we thought it was going to be. And there was no surprises really there. So it all just seemed like a bloody waste of time.
little bit of reordering, though. I'll throw it in favour that there was some changes, but it's what the Ferrari guys said would happen. So the reordering being Max and Lewis, but it's what they said to happen. Is going to be a red flag, and that's kind of what it was. We saw, in the actual Grand Prix that there was a red flag, and the top order it was very early with 1 lap, 2 laps gone. But that's essentially what the sprint was. It was a red flag. You extended the race to be 2 hours, as in actually 2 hours, not 2 hours or 2 hours. If it gets to 2 hours, it's like the race is generally an hour and a half. Here's an extra half an hour. And it just felt like, here's your race, let's stop it and let's restart it with a red flag. And that's how it felt. And it's...
So if it wasn't for Alonso, I don't think I probably would have fallen asleep, to be honest.
Yeah, there was nothing particularly entertaining about it. And Silverstone's this time round, Silverstone didn't deliver in terms of the overtakes. It was at 2018 race when Hamilton was fighting back from the back, and it was Vettel versus Bottas versus Raikkonen versus Hamilton versus Ricciardo to a small extent. It was a terrific race. It showed that overtaking can be done. The Wellington Straight was well used, and this time,
I think maybe the only saving grace for the format as it currently is would be if they tried it next year. If the cars do what they want them to do next year, and it promotes the closer racing, then this sprint could be more interesting. But with the current cars and the current regulations, I don't see the point in trying out that specific format when you kind of know what you're going to get.
Yeah, I think it's that following closely in a sprint race is never going to turn out to be a good time. So, yeah, not the biggest success for that. And we're not even touched on the new cars, but they look not as
very shiny. Magpies a lot.
That livery was great, but they don't just look as dramatic as I thought they might. Those early artist renders, as ever, have really overhyped it a little bit. And the ones that came a little bit later, the models, looked a bit more similar to what we've got now. They just look like a curvier version of the car that we have now. The rear wing looks interesting, but yeah,
they give me kind of Formula E vibes a little bit.
Yeah, and that's not a bad thing because I think Formula E cars look pretty cool in general. The racing and the noise is a separate problem for Formula E, but for the looks,
I'll leave that for another podcast.
Yeah, and get Hannah on for that, who is a massive Formula E fan to even things out. But yeah, for me, the car looks all right. We just need to see what they actually look like when the designers and the engineers get their hands on them, because they won't look like that model car. They're going to look drastically different, but that's why we want to watch F1. But let's go and talk about our top threes and bottom threes. I'm going to start with Jacob, even though he's not joining us right now. And Jacob has gone for Fernando Alonso, and he says he's still got it. This is his top three, I may add. Charles Leclerc, who is very good in every session, and I cannot argue with that. And then Danny Rick, nothing special, but getting there, getting better. And his bottom three of Sergio Perez, scruffy all weekend, spin in the sprint, contact with Kimi, needs to be picking up points when Max doesn't. I can agree with that, although taking away points from Hamilton when Max doesn't. Pierre Gasly, maybe harsh, but wasn't really at the weekend, wasn't really at it this weekend, but maybe the car doesn't suit the track.
So AlphaTauri was saying a lot all weekend that they for some reason or other, they just couldn't hook it up in the right way, and Pierre was kind of surprised but annoyed at that as well. So I think it was a combination of the two there.
I've heard that Yuki was surprised that he scored a point, actually. He's like, how did he manage that? And then he's also got Antonio Giovinazzi, who was just meh, as he put it. Thiemo, your top three, bottom three?
My top three, because I'm just digging my heels in and just preparing for the oncoming storm, I'm going to say Hamilton because of the good comeback drive. It was never guaranteed, and he had a fair few obstacles in his way that, if it was a different driver, might not have been able to get past. So I'm gonna go and just commit to that. Leclerc as well, because huge championship material right there, and he deserved that win so much that it hurt a little bit. And then Ricciardo, because Honey Badger resurgence, hopefully, fingers crossed. And then for the bottom three, I agree with Jacob again, Perez / Red Bull strategy, because I feel like you can see why they did what they did, but I wouldn't have done that. The stewards for George, because and then I find it a bit tricky to come up with the last one, but I've gone for a slightly unconventional one here. The McLaren pit stop crew, because if they'd have been a bit quicker, they could have prevented the Hamilton win, because he would have had to pass Lando at the very least, and that could have given Leclerc the extra couple of laps he needed to win the race.
Yeah, I agree on the mechanics for my bottom three as well. I had the not just the McLaren pit crew, also had the Ferrari pit crew for Sainz's slow stop, which was impactful for him. Racing Ricciardo. My bottom three, if I'm going to go down that route, was also Sergio Perez, for obvious reasons all mentioned above. And then Vettel doing a spin, just really not hooking it up.
He made up for it after the race, though, by being
cleaning
a good
up.
chap.
Yeah, cleaning up was great to see, but on the racetrack, not so good. And then probably not too surprising for Leclerc and Fernando Alonso in my top three. Alonso solely for that sprint race.
He's loving life at the moment, isn't he?
Yeah, he certainly improved ever since Ocon got his contract. I don't know what's happened there, but yeah, Alonso has got did well for sprint, and that was really, he was the main benefactor of sprint because he didn't qualify particularly well, and then managed to score a decent haul of points, and then also put, even though I don't think I even saw him once on the weekend, was Lance Stroll, who kind of jumped from P15.
Yeah, they had quite a poor early weekend, but in the race he kind of just head down and managed to get on with things, didn't they?
Yeah, when I looked at the actual positions for people finishing, they were kind of here, there, and everywhere. It was really surprising because we didn't see a lot of it, or if we did, I wasn't particularly understanding how the pit stops were shaking things up. But yeah, Stroll from P15 to P14 to P8. So my top three: Leclerc, Alonso, and Stroll. But anyway, thank you everybody for listening to us talking Formula One in this episode. Thiemo, if people want to find more of your motorsport thoughts, where can they find your work on the internet?
You can find me here on GP Grandstand, of course, and then you can find me over on Drive Tribe. Feel free to follow me on Instagram and search for On the Curves on YouTube if you want to hear me interviewing many people from the world of motorsport.
Yes, you are doing very well with that as well, Thiemo. So look in the links below or in the show notes. And for myself, you can find my writing on gpgrandstand.com and fortlot.com for my satire F1 news, such the F1 week that was on YouTube. And of course, I'm on the Grand Prix Grandstand TV YouTube channel, where you'll find me interviewing drivers and talking F1. Thank you for listening to us talking F1, and keep your ears and eyes peeled for the next episode, where you can hear us talking F1 all over again.